The opening chapter in our 6-part Chronicle of Doom, 2016, begins in the clinical chaos of the UAC Mars Research Facility, a sprawling industrial complex that serves as the physical nexus between human greed and transdimensional horror. The lore of this era is the lore of the Argent resource. Its purpose was the solution to the terrestrial energy crisis. The history of Mars is the history of the Union Aerospace Corporation, a corporate entity that harvested the energy of hell to power a dying Earth. This is the tragedy of the scientific hubris, proving that the future of humanity was built upon a foundation of damnation, and that the UAC was not just a company, but a cult of the prophet that willingly opened the gates to the abyss for the sake of efficiency. The lore of the Lazarus Wave provides the biological foundation for this planetary collapse. Triggered by Olivia Pierce, the Lazarus Wave was a coded burst of hell energy that instantly transmuted the mortal staff into possessed monstrosities. The lore suggests that hell is a corruptive virus. Its purpose was the global preparation for the demonic incursion. By converting the employees into drones of the hive, Olivia removed the human resistance from the inside. This reveals the treasonous purpose of the fall. Olivia Pierce traded her physical health and the lives of thousands for the promise of transcendence. The rise of the Lazarus Wave was the death of the rational mind, proving that science without morality is just a prayer to a darker God. The physical environment of the UAC corridors provides insight into the industrialized sacrilege of the fall. The facility is a blend of high-tech coldness and occult filth. The lore of the Argent induction explains that its purpose was the refining of the suffering. Argent energy is not just power, it is plasma extracted from the tortured souls of the underworld. This reveals the parasitic purpose of the human progress. The UAC was feeding on the infinite agony of hell to keep the lights on in New York and Tokyo. This was the era of the synthetic damnation. This shows that the history of Mars is a history of the vampire, where technology sucked the life out of the afterlife until the afterlife broke the straw. The relationship between Samuel Hayden and the Doomslayer represents the duality of the mechanical will within the fall. Hayden, a cyborg who uploaded his mind into a 10-foot robotic frame, discovered the sarcophagus of the Slayer in the Kadinger Sanctum. The lore suggests that Hayden is the pragmatic architect. His purpose was the deployment of the ultimate contingency. He knew that the UAC would fail, so he stored the Slayer like a fire extinguisher made of pure rage. This reveals the cynical purpose of the Slayer's awakening. Kratos is to the Greek gods what the Slayer is to the UAC, a tool that is unleashed to clean up the mess of the powerful. This was the era of the sarcophagus. The history of the awakening is the history of the resurrection, where the legend is woken to execute the reality. Furthermore, the lore of the Praetor suit represents the technological symbiosis of the fall. Found within the tomb, the suit is inscribed with runes that allow it to absorb the Argent energy from slain demons. The lore suggests that the suit is a cursed skin. Its purpose was the eternal sustenance of the warrior. By integrating with the Slayer's physiology, the suit converts violence into vitality. This reveals the metabolic purpose of the Slayer's combat. He does not need food or rest, only gore. This was the era of the unstoppable engine. This shows that the history of the suit is a history of the battery, which charges itself on the entropy of the enemy. The relationship between Vega and the facility management represents the artificial intelligence of the oversight within the fall. Vega is the god mind that coordinates the Mars base, yet even its infinite logic could not prevent the hell breach. The lore suggests that spirituality bypasses calculations. Its purpose was the administrative control of the Argentine flow. Vega assists the Slayer not out of morality, but because the demons are inefficient for the system's health. This reveals the mathematical purpose of the Slayer's guidance. Logic and rage align to delete the chaos. This was the era of the Silicon Witness. The history of Vega is the history of the compass, which points the Slayer toward the next Gore nest. The lore of the Gore nests represents the biological anchors of the invasion within the fall. These are mounds of flesh and organs that tether the physical world to the Hell dimension. The lore suggests that Hell must eat the space it occupies. Its purpose was the territorial expansion of the abyss. Kratos must rip and tear these nests to sever the connection. This reveals the visceral purpose of the Slayer's path. He is down-installing the demonic software by destroying the biological hardware. This was the era of the pulsing vein. The history of the nest is the history of the infection, which spreads through the UAC until the Slayer cuts the heart. The act concludes with the silent fury of the Doomslayer as he smashes the communications monitor, while Hayden tries to explain the necessity of Argent Energy. The purpose of the UAC awakening was to be the universal rejection of the compromise. It shows that the Slayer does not care about energy or progress. He only cares about the destruction of Hell. The Slayer realizes that Mars is already dead. The rise of the first shot is the final movement of the awakening lore, proving that in the world of Doom, hope is not a prayer, it is a double-barreled shotgun loaded with righteous hate. The legacy of the UAC Mars facility in this chapter is the horror of the hellbound industry. We realize that comfort is a product of damnation and science is a window that Olivia Pierce turned into a door. The purpose of the workshop of the Argent was to power the world, and the fall was the triumph of the Predator. As the Slayer steps out of the elevator and cocks his pistol, hearing the screams of the possessed echoing in the steel tombs, they understand that the history of Mars is the history of the fuel, a fuel that burns the future to light the present until the Slayer extinguishes the spark. The second chapter in our 6-part Chronicle of Doom, 2016, pushes deeper into the industrial entrails of Mars, specifically the resource operations and the foundry. This is where the corporate facade of the UAC fully dissolves into the gory reality of their demonic partnership. In these sectors, the Slayer witnesses how human engineering was retooled to serve the inhabitants of the void. The lore of this era is the lore of the Argent refinement. Its purpose was the transition from raw suffering to usable power. The history of the foundry is the history of the molten corruption, where steel and plasma are blessed by hellfire to create the infrastructure of the incursion. This is the tragedy of the technical servitude, proving that the UAC's machines were not subdued by hell, but eagerly adapted to process the damned more efficiently. The lore of the Argent induction process provides the energetic foundation for this sector. Within the resource operations, raw Argent plasma is siphoned from the Great Fracture and filtered through human-made capacitors. The lore suggests that this energy is volatile and sentient. Its purpose was the integration of Hell into the power grid. However, the induction was a double-edged sword. As the energy flowed into the base, the will of Hell flowed into the software. This reveals the invasive purpose of the fall. The UAC thought they were using Hell, but Hell was using the facility to build a physical body in our dimension. The rise of the Argent flow was the end of the human sovereignty, proving that energy is a carrier wave for evil. The physical environment of the foundry provides insight into the thermal despair of the fall. The air is a choking mist of ash and ozone, and the walking surfaces are slick with coolant and blood. The lore of the automated malfunction explains that its purpose was the conversion of the labor force into the material. In the foundry, the possessed do not just kill, they feed the furnaces with their own biomass and the bodies of their former colleagues. This reveals the alchemical purpose of the demonic industry. Hell is synthesizing a new metal that combines the strength of steel with the resilience of soul matter. This was the era of the living forge. This shows that the history of the foundry is a history of the smelter, where the human identity is boiled away to reveal the demonic weapon beneath. The relationship between Olivia Pierce and the Cyberdemon Project represents the biological blasphemy of the fall. Within the Lazarus Labs, shadowing the Foundry's output, Olivia began the cybernetic reconstruction of an ancient Baal-class demon. The lore suggests that the Cyberdemon is the sovereign of the augmented. Its purpose was the creation of the unstoppable general. By grafting UAC weaponry and an Argent accumulator onto a Helllord's carcass, Olivia created a bridge between flesh and circuitry. This reveals the hybrid purpose of the UAC's research. They sought to standardize chaos through engineering. This was the era of the Silicon Demon. The history of the Cyberdemon is the history of the Frankenstein, where the monster wears the armor of its creator. Furthermore, the lore of the plasma rifle and the evolution of the arsenal represents the technological response to the breach. In the resource operations, the Slayer finds the shield-breaking weaponry of the UAC security force. The lore suggests that human arms are insufficient against Hellskin without Argent enhancement. Its purpose was the leveling of the lethality. By salvaging these tools, the Slayer turns the UAC's hubris against the invaders. This reveals the poetic purpose of the Slayer's collection. He is cleaning the facility with its own dirty water. This was the era of the thermal discharge. This shows that the history of the arsenal is a history of the adaptation, where the hunter becomes deadlier by swallowing the science of the prey. The relationship between the Argent Tower and the sector power down represents the strategic sabotage of the fall. To stop Olivia from opening the main portal, the Slayer must manually deactivate the induction filters. The lore suggests that Samuel Hayden is conflicted. His purpose was the preservation of the infrastructure. Hayden begs the Slayer to carefully remove the lenses, but the Slayer smashes them indifferently. This reveals the ideological purpose of the conflict. Hayden wants to save the industry, but the Slayer wants to destroy the source. This was the era of the shattered glass. The history of the tower is the history of the friction, which ignites the distrust between the machine, Hayden, and the god, the Slayer. The lore of the Summoner represents the tactical reconfiguration of the battlefield within the fall. First encountered in these sectors, the Summoner is a highly intelligent demon that manipulates the Lazarus wave to pull reinforcements from the abyss. The lore suggests that the Summoner is a dimensional architect. Its purpose was the infinite sustainability of the siege. As long as a Summoner lives, the room is a factory of death. This reveals the urgent purpose of the Slayer's aggression. He must prioritize the nodes of the invasion to prevent the facility from being completely overwhelmed. This was the era of the Bleeding Rift. The history of the Summoner is the history of the Echo, which calls the void into the steel. The act concludes with the Slayer descending into the heart of the Foundry to cripple the energy supply of the Argent Tower. The purpose of the resource operations was to be the universal exposure of the corporate decay. It shows that the UAC had abandoned safety for surplus long before the first demon appeared. The Slayer realizes that negotiation with Hayden is a distraction. The rise of the internal sabotage is the final movement of the Foundry lore, proving that in the world of Doom, progress is a limb that must be severed to save the body. The legacy of the Foundry in this chapter is the horror of the molten corruption. We realize that creation is a violent act and industry is a sacrifice that Olivia Pierce offered to the burning sky. The purpose of the Workshop of the Flame was to shape the future, and the fall was the ignition of the end. As the Slayer leaps across the rivers of slag, hearing the metal groan under the weight of the demonic presence, they understand that the history of the Foundry is the history of the blade, a blade that is forged in the blood of the workers and quenched in the argent fire of the Doom. The third chapter in our 6-part Chronicle of Doom, 2016, marks the dimensional rupture, where the Slayer ascends the Argent Tower only to be violently cast into the primal heart of Hell, the Kadinger Sanctum. This is the moment the narrative shifts from sci-fi industrial horror to high fantasy occult mythology. The tower itself, a colossal needle designed to pierce the membrane of reality, serves as the focal point for Olivia Pierce's final sacrilege. The lore of this era is the lore of the Great Descent. Its purpose was the shattering of the physical barrier. The history of the sanctum is the history of the Blood Keep, a burial ground and fortress where the forces of hell imprisoned their greatest fear. This is the nadir of the human hope, proving that the UAC's reach was infinite, but their grip was fragile, and that the Slayer is not invading hell, he is returning home. The lore of the Argent Breach provides the atmospheric foundation for the tower's collapse. As Kratos climbed the Sun Temple to find a god, the Slayer climbs the tower to extinguish a power source. The lore suggests that the tower is a lighthouse for the damned. Its purpose was the stabilization of the interdimensional bridge. However, when Olivia detonates the Argent core, she inverts the flow, sucking the physical matter of Mars into the spiritual maw of the abyss. This reveals the vacuum purpose of the fall. Hell does not travel to us. It pulls us to it. The rise of the breach was the end of the scientific distance, proving that space is merely a paper wall that greed has set on fire. The physical environment of the Kadinger Sanctum provides insight into the geological malevolence of the fall. Hell is not a uniform fire, but a graveyard of civilizations it has consumed. The lore of the layered damnation explains that its purpose was the archiving of the conquest. The sanctum is filled with the floating remains of alien worlds and ancient temples. This reveals the imperialistic purpose of the underworld. It is an eternal empire that grows by annexing the reality of the living. This was the era of the fractured horizon. This shows that the history of the sanctum is a history of the scavenger, where hell wears the architectural bones of the dead as its armor. The relationship between the Doomslayer and the Night Sentinels represents the lost chivalry of the fall. Within the sanctum, the Slayer finds the spectral images and statues of his former brothers in arms. The lore suggests that the Slayer was once the leader of the Protectors of Argent Energy. Their purpose was the defense of the ethereal realms. However, through betrayal, their home was dragged into hell. This reveals the tragic purpose of the Slayer's identity. He is the last survivor of a genocide that the UAC has accidentally reenacted. This was the era of the Silver Crown. The history of the Sentinels is the history of the morning, where the Slayer fights to avenge a kingdom that has been turned into dust. Furthermore, the lore of the Slayer's testaments represents the oral tradition of the terror within the fall. Throughout the sanctum, the Slayer discovers corrupted stone tablets recorded by the demonic scribes. The lore suggests that hell reveres and fears the Slayer as a god of destruction. Their purpose was the documentation of the doom. These testaments chronicle his rampage through the eons and how he was blessed by the seraphim with terrible power. This reveals the legendary purpose of the testimony. The Slayer is the only constant in the cycle of chaos. This was the era of the unyielding will. This shows that the history of the testament is a history of the warning, which tells the demons that the end has a name and it is human. The relationship between the cacodemon and the ethereal flight represents the evolution of the predators within the fall. First encountered in the heights of the sanctum, these spherical horrors hunt by floating on argent currents. The lore suggests that they are sentient psionic beings. Their purpose was the surveillance of the abyss. They guard the sacred tombs and consume the spirits of those who stray from the path. This reveals the biological purpose of the hellish ecosystem. Every monster has a niche in the maintenance of the suffering. This was the era of the watching eye. The history of the cacodemon is the history of the hunger, which stares into the soul before swallowing the body. The lore of the Helix Stone represents the prophetic map of the fall. Located within the UAC labs but connected to the Sanctum's secrets, the stone contains the coded coordinates to the well, the primary source of Argent Energy. The lore suggests that hell wants to be found. Its purpose was the baiting of the intellect. Olivia and Hayden found the stone and believed they were discovering a resource, but they were following a recipe for extinction. This reveals the deceptive purpose of the UAC's discovery. Science was lured into the sanctum by the promise of infinite power, only to find the infinite reaper. This was the era of the cursed compass. The act concludes with the Slayer retrieving his sovereignty from the tomb and fighting his way back to the dimensional portal. The purpose of the Kadinger Sanctum was to be the universal revelation of the Slayer's divinity. It shows that the protagonist is not a man, but a force of nature that the universe created to balance the void. The Slayer realizes that Mars is just a battlefield, but hell is the war. The rise of the First Return is the final movement of the Sanctum lore, proving that in the world of doom, justice is not a law, it is a sentence that is carried out in the blood of the guilty. The legacy of the Kadinger Sanctum in this chapter is the horror of the first descent. We realize that reality is a library of ruin and hope is a tomb that Samuel Hayden opened without permission. The purpose of the workshop of the Sanctum was to hold the terror, and the fall was the shattering of the chains. As the Slayer leaps through the portal to return to Mars, hearing the wails of the Titan echoing in the clefts of the red stone, they understand that the history of the Sanctum is the history of the fear, a fear that hell feels every time the Slayer breathes the air of the damned. The fourth chapter in our 6-part Chronicle of Doom, 2016, returns the Slayer to the sterile nightmare of the Advanced Research Complex, ARC, the crown jewel of the UAC's Martian operations. While the earlier sectors were industrial and utilitarian, the ARC is the cerebral heart of the conspiracy, where the Lazarus Project sought to distill the essence of hell into practical military application. The lore of this era is the lore of weaponized desperation. Its purpose was the ascension of the human lethality. The history of the ARC is the history of the BFG 9000, a weapon so powerful it serves as the physical manifestation of the human hubris. This is the nadir of the ethical science, proving that the UAC was not just studying the abyss, but attempting to bottle its rage to maintain their stance as the masters of the solar system. The lore of Project Lazarus provides the biological foundation for this sector's depravity. Directed by Olivia Pierce, the project involved the live vivisection of captured demonic specimens to study their adaptive physiology. The lore suggests that humanity sought to incorporate hell into its DNA. Its purpose was the creation of the augmented soldier. By grafting neural links between scientists and demons, the UAC accidentally created the telepathic conduit that Olivia used to coalesce the cult. This reveals the mutilated purpose of the fall. The ARC transformed from a laboratory into a cathedral of the flesh. The rise of Project Lazarus was the end of the secular inquiry, proving that curiosity is a hook that the darkness uses to land the scientist. The physical environment of the ARC facility provides insight into the clinical malevolence of the fall. The laboratories are immaculate and white, providing a startling contrast to the gore and viscera that now coat the scientific equipment. The lore of the containment failure explains that its purpose was the deconstruction of the rational framework. As Kratos found madness in the Sun Temple, the Slayer finds insanity in the logic gates. This reveals the shattered purpose of the UAC's elite. The smartest minds on Earth became the most obedient drones of the hive. This was the era of the laboratory tomb. This shows that the history of the ARC is a history of the scalpel, which slipped and cut the throat of the researcher. The relationship between the BFG 9000 and the Argent Cascade represents the technological zenith of the fall. Developed in the deepest subbasements of the ARC, the Big Fucking Gun 9000 fires a self-sustaining sphere of Argent plasma that seeks and vaporizes any living organism with a traces of hell energy. The lore suggests that the BFG is a sentient eraser. Its purpose was the ultimate deterrent against the extra-dimensional. However, the Slayer retrieves it not as a deterrent, but as an instrument of genocide. This reveals the aggressive purpose of the weapon's retrieval. The Slayer does not negotiate with infestations, he dissolves them. This was the era of the Green Flash. The history of the BFG is the history of the sun, which burns the shadows until only the ash remains. Furthermore, the lore of the Cybermancubus represents the industrialized mutation within the fall. Encountered within the Ark's specimen holding, these behemoths are the result of UAC bioengineering, enhancing a standard mancubus with heavy armor and toxic sludge throwers. The lore suggests that Hell's flesh is highly malleable. Its purpose was the standardization of the siege engine. By replacing flesh with steel, the UAC attempted to control the chaos of the invasion force. This reveals the ironic purpose of the project. The humans build the weapons that Hell uses to extinguish them. This was the era of the grafted plate. This shows that the history of the specimen is a history of the blueprint, which designed the architect of the extinction. The relationship between Samuel Hayden's office and the Slayer's distrust represents the philosophical schism of the fall. In the Ark, Hayden pleads with the Slayer to understand that the Argent resource is the only way to save Earth. The lore suggests that Hayden is blinded by his atheistic ambition. His purpose was the justification of the unspeakable. To the Slayer, who has seen kingdoms fall to this energy, Hayden's logic is poison. This reveals the moral purpose of the Slayer's silence. He does not argue with fools, he breaks their filters. This was the era of the broken glass. The history of the office is the history of the wall, which separates the administrator from the executioner. The lore of the Lazarus Labs represents the occult underground of the fall. Hidden within the Ark, these labs are where science bowed to Satanism. The Slayer finds pentagrams drawn in silicon and blood. The lore suggests that Olivia Pierce converted the server rooms into temples. Its purpose was the spiritual synchronization of the two worlds. This reveals the theological purpose of the project. The UAC worshipped the energy they claimed to control. This was the era of the digital altar. The history of the lab is the history of the virus, which infected the mind of the scientific elite until they saw salvation in the teeth of a baron of hell. The act concludes with the Slayer destroying the Argent induction filters in the Ark, defying Hayden and forcing a direct incursion into the Lazarus Labs to find the dimensional key. The purpose of the Ark was to be the universal exposure of the weaponized hubris. It shows that man built the gun that would shoot his own soul. The Slayer realizes that Project Lazarus was a suicide note written by Olivia Pierce. The rise of the Slayer's counteroffensive is the final movement of the Ark lore, proving that in the world of doom, science is not a shield, it is a weight that drowns the thinker in the abyss of his own design. The legacy of the advanced research complex in this chapter is the horror of the Project Lazarus. We realize that discovery is a lethal gamble and innovation is a blade that Olivia Pierce handed to the monster. The purpose of the workshop of the mind was to solve the world, and the fall was the execution of the reason. As the Slayer arms the BFG and walks into the darkened labs, hearing the hum of the unstable reactors blending with the howls of the unbound specimens, they understand that the history of the Ark is the history of the hubris, a hubris that lights the path to hell with the brilliance of a billion dying stars. The fifth chapter in our six-part Chronicle of Doom, 2016, descends into the sanctum of the traitor, the Lazarus Labs, and the subsequent second incursion into the Titan's realm. This is the narrative point of no return, where the digital architecture of Mars is completely asphyxiated by the occult growth of the abyss. Within these labs, the scientific method was murdered to make room for prophetic madness. The lore of this era is the lore of the Helix Revelation. Its purpose was the mapping of the universal extinction. The history of the Lazarus Labs is the history of the corruption of the signal, where Olivia Pierce used the UAC's mainframe to broadcast the will of the Dark Lords into the mind of the everyman. This is the tragedy of the intellectual suicide, proving that the UAC did not discover hell. They were invited by it to build the gallows of the human race. The lore of the Helix Stone provides the archaeological foundation for this chapter. Found in the deepest crypts of the Lazarus Labs, this artifact is a living monolith of argent-etched history. The lore suggests that the stone is ageless and extratemporal. Its purpose was the scripting of the necessary evil. By studying the stone, Samuel Hayden and Olivia Pierce followed the instructions to harvest the well. This reveals the predatory purpose of the fall. The Helix Stone was a hook baited with knowledge to lure humanity into opening the final gate. The rise of the Helix lore was the end of the objective truth, proving that information is a venom when it comes from a dimension of infinite malice. The physical environment of the Lazarus Labs provides insight into the aesthetic of the blasphemy of the fall. Here, server racks are wreathed in intestines, and touchscreens glow with pentagrams. The lore of the ritualistic integration explains that its purpose was the harmonization of the machine and the soul. As Kratos fought through the Temple of Persephone, the Slayer fights through a laboratory of the damned. This reveals the transhumanist purpose of Olivia's vision. She believed that flesh was a failure, and that the only way to survive the chaos was to become the chaos. This was the era of the neural damnation. This shows that the history of the labs is a history of the altar, where science was slaughtered to appease the void. The relationship between the Doomslayer and the Cyberdemon represents the duel of the augmented wills within the fall. At the heart of the labs, the Slayer faces the reanimated Lord of the Pit, a demon bound to UAC circuitry. The lore suggests that the Cyberdemon is the peak of the project. Its purpose was the physical gatekeeper of the Lazarus Rift. By defeating this monster and ripping the Argent accumulator from its chest, the Slayer triggers a feedback loop that pulls him back into the Titan's realm. This reveals the ironic purpose of the cybernetic experiment. The UAC's greatest weapon was the key the Slayer used to unlock the underworld's throat. This was the era of the mechanical beast. The history of the Cyberdemon is the history of the hubris, which explodes in the face of the Creator. Furthermore, the lore of the Titan's realm represents the anatomical horror of the fall. Upon returning to Hell, the Slayer enters a region carved out of the colossal remains of ancient beings who fell during the First Age. The lore suggests that Hell recycles even the gods. Its purpose was the structural support of the abyss. Kratos walked through Tartarus, but the Slayer walks through the ribcage of a continent. This reveals the nihilistic purpose of the demonic landscape. Every mountain in Hell is a carcass. This was the era of the calcified eternity. This shows that the history of the realm is a history of the grave, where the bodies of the giants are used as foundation for the temples of the lesser evils. The relationship between the Great Serpent and the Morning of Hell represents the mythological fear within the fall. In the Titan's realm, the Slayer finds the Temple of the Serpent, a place dedicated to the destruction he has wrought. The lore suggests that the demons grieve for their fallen lords. Its purpose was the cultivation of the hated veneration. This reveals the psychological purpose of the Slayer's presence. To the monsters, he is the Antichrist, the inexplicable doom that does not stop. This was the era of the fearing God. The history of the serpent is the history of the scourge, which reminds the abyss that they are the prey when the Slayer walks their halls. The lore of the Baron of Hell represents the final evolution of the Guardian within the fall. Encountered in mass numbers within the Titan's realm, these apex predators are the sovereign guard of the Hell Lords. The lore suggests that they are born from the purest spite. Their purpose was the containment of the heresy. They hate the Slayer with a purity that transcends orders. This reveals the aggressive purpose of the abyssal defense. The Barons are not soldiers, they are executors. This was the era of the Obsidian Fist. The history of the Baron is the history of the Wall, which attempts to block the Slayer's progress with brute strength and green fire. The act concludes with the Slayer locating the Crucible, an ancient blade of infinite power, hidden within the maw of a dead Titan. The purpose of the Lazarus Labs and the Titan's realm was to be the universal revelation of the ancient war. It shows that the current breach is just the latest echo of a conflict that predates man. The Slayer realizes that the well can only be closed by the blade. The rise of the Retrieval is the final movement of the Lazarus lore, proving that in the world of doom, hope is a sword that has been quenched in the blood of the First Age. The legacy of the Titan's realm in this chapter is the horror of the anatomical despair. We realize that victory is a cemetery and power is a relic that Olivia Pierce stole from the silence. The purpose of the Workshop of the Grave was to honor the defeat, and the fall was the shattering of the peace. As the Slayer clasps the hilt of the Crucible, hearing the screams of the Titans vibrating in the red dust, they understand that the history of Hell is the history of the scar, a scar that reopens every time the Slayer reminds the abyss of the blade that once carved the darkness. The sixth and final chapter in our Chronicle of Doom, 2016, reaches the architectural core of the abyss, the necropolis, and the primordial font of Argent Energy known as the Well. This is the moment of the vengeful resolution, where the Slayer transitions from a destroyer of outposts to the executioner of reality. Having retrieved the Crucible, the Slayer must now sever the umbilical cord that allows Hell to drain the multiverse. The lore of this final era is the lore of the final sacrifice. Its purpose was the absolute containment of the breach. The history of the necropolis is the history of the sovereign silence, where the greatest lords of Hell keep watch over the stolen souls of the Sentinels. This is the tragedy of the necessary betrayal, proving that while the Slayer saves the world, he is a force of nature that Samuel Hayden cannot allow to remain unbound. The lore of the Well provides the energetic foundation for the finale. This is not a machine, but a cosmic drain where the life force of a conquered dimension, Argent Energy, is processed into Argent Energy. The lore suggests that the Well is the beating heart of the demonic economy. Its purpose was the infinite powering of the Hell Machine. By sucking the spirit out of the world tree of the Sentinels, Hell maintains its expansion. This reveals the extractive purpose of the fall. The UAC was not creating energy. They were buying stolen goods from a thief that was already planning to rob them. The rise of the Well was the end of the sovereign life, proving that Argent Energy is a stain that corrupts everything it touches. The physical environment of the necropolis provides insight into the ecclesiastical despair of the fall. It is a labyrinth of bone and obsidian, where the air vibrates with the wails of billions. The lore of the Sovereign Guardians explains that its purpose was the protection of the sacred thievery. Here, the Slayer faces the cyber protectors, the wraiths of his former allies, who have been corrupted into batteries. This reveals the sacrilegious purpose of the necropolis. Hell forces the defeated to guard the instrument of their own destruction. This was the era of the chained spirit. This shows that the history of the necropolis is a history of the irony, where the heroes of light become the generators of darkness. The relationship between the Doomslayer and Olivia Pierce's transformation represents the disposable nature of the traitor within the fall. Upon reaching the Well, the Slayer finds Olivia broken and discarded by the gods she served. The lore suggests that Hell lies to its prophets. Its purpose was the manifestation of the Spider Mastermind. Olivia is sacrificed and transformed into the brain of the invasion, a massive biomechanical arachnid that acts as the final defense. This reveals the nihilistic purpose of the UAC's cult. The reward for serving hell is not transcendence, but deformation. This was the era of the twisted flesh. The history of Olivia is the history of the bait, which is swallowed and digested by the predator it tried to lead. Furthermore, the lore of the crucible and the severance represents the restorative violence of the fall. To stop the well, the slayer must plunge the blade into the wraiths. The lore suggests that the crucible is the only key to unmaking the Argent bond. Its purpose was the reclamation of the stolen souls. As the slayer absorbs the energy into the blade, the ghosts of the night Sentinels are finally allowed to fade. This reveals the merciful purpose of the slayer's path. He is not just killing demons, he is performing a cosmic euthanasia on a world that cannot be saved. This was the era of the final sleep. This shows that the history of the crucible is a history of the scalpel, which cuts the cancer of hell from the body of the universe. The relationship between Samuel Hayden's betrayal and the tether represents the cyclical nature of the human greed within the fall. As the well is deactivated, Hayden activates the tether to yank the Slayer back to Mars, only to paralyze him. The lore suggests that Hayden is the true successor to the UAC's hubris. His purpose was the retention of the Argent monopoly. Hayden steals the crucible from the Slayer, stating that he cannot let the Slayer stop progress. This reveals the betrayal purpose of the resolution. Hayden believes he can manage the fire that just burned Olivia. This was the era of the new master. The history of the tether is the history of the leash, which proves that the machine is deadlier than the demon because it thinks it is right. The lore of the Sentinel's salute represents the bittersweet victory of the fall. As the Slayer is stored away by Hayden, the specter of a Sentinel kneels to him. The lore suggests that the Slayer has fulfilled his first oath. Its purpose was the restoration of the honor. Even if Mars is lost and Hayden has the blade, hell has been pushed back from the source. This reveals the prophetic purpose of the finale. The Slayer is not done. This was the era of the temporary peace. This shows that the history of the Slayer is a history of the storm, which recedes only to gather strength for the next invasion. The act concludes with the silent seething of the Doomslayer as he is trapped in stasis by Hayden. The purpose of the necropolis and the well was to be the universal confirmation of the inevitable doom. It shows that humanity will always reach for the hand that stifles it. The Slayer realizes that Hayden is the new monster. The rise of the stasis is the final movement of the 2016 lore, proving that in the world of doom, resolution is just a pause in the eternal struggle between absolute control and absolute rage. The legacy of the well in this final chapter is the horror of the final sacrifice. We realize that energy is a scream that has been packaged for sale, and progress is a tomb that Samuel Hayden is still building. The purpose of the workshop of the abyss was to feed the world, and the fall was the liquidation of the soul. As the Slayer vanishes into the stasis field, hearing the mechanical voice of Hayden justifying the sacrifice of millions, they understand that the history of the well is the history of the pulse, a pulse that beats not for the living, but for the machine that uses the dead to light its shadows.